Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Alfonso Peluso and I'm a Studio Associate Professor at IIT in the College of Architecture. And today we're going to look at modeling the absolute towers by mad architects. And I have a finished product here, and we're going to look at using Graph Mapper once again, and in this case we're going to look at it to make a rotation for the tower. You see the tower is stretching out here. And if we look at the absolute towers by mad architects, we can see that this project definitely takes advantage of parametric modeling and the use of Grasshopper. If you haven't seen this project, you can Google Mad Architects Absolute Towers. It's in Mississauga, Canada. I did have the opportunity to see it in person, and it's just as beautiful in person as it is in these pictures. So let's dive into this. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to make some points to draw the base profile curve. So we're going to do this by making 5 points, and we're going to use construct point, and I'm double clicking and I'm typing in XYZ and I'm choosing construct point. And we're going to need some number sliders between 0 and 100. So I'm going to double click, I'm going to type in 25. That'll give me a number slider between 0 and 100. Now the first point I can leave at Rhino's origin, so I can leave it at 0, 0. And I'm going to go ahead and select the 2 number sliders and the capsule for the XYZ point. I'm going to start to drag it and then hold down my Alt key. That will make a copy. You can also do a copy paste. So this is going to be my second point, and just locating these anywhere in the XY space, and I'll be able to come back and adjust these. We're gonna make the 5 points, and then we're gonna draw an interpolated curve through those points. Okay, I need a couple more here. Okay, so let's see what an interpolated curve looks like through those points. So I'm going to double click and type in interpolate. And there's a couple types of interpolates. The one that I'm looking for is without the tangent, so without the t in parentheses. So I'll choose interpolate. Now what will happen is when you plug in the first point, this capsule that's orange right now, so orange means it needs information, this capsule is going to turn red. Don't be worried, it just means that to make an interpolated curve, it needs more than 1 point. And if I hover over the balloon, it says insufficient interpolation points for a curve. Once I start to add more points holding the shift key, that capsule is going to turn gray, and in the Rhino window you're starting to see that curve being generated. Now I need this curve to be closed, and periodic, if I set that to yes, I'm going to get a closed curve. If I hover over it, it is now set to false. So if I set it to true, I will get a closed curve. So if I double click and I start to type in Boolean, I will get what's called a Boolean toggle, and there's where I can set that to true, and I can plug that into periodic, and now I have a closed curve. So I'm going to use this for my base curve. Okay, so we're making a tower. When I graduated from IIT, I also went to school at IIT. I received my bachelor and my master degree from IIT. And when I graduated, I was fortunate enough to go and work for Helmut Jahn. Helmut Jahn is a famous architect born in Germany, practicing here in Chicago. And I used to work on a lot of competitions for skyscrapers, and this was before Grasshopper. And I would spend hours and hours making 3D models of these skyscrapers, and then Helmut would come by with a new sketch, and then I'd have to model the new sketch, spend hours and hours, and so on. And I always joke with my students that if I had Grasshopper, I wouldn't be working around the clock modeling these skyscrapers. I would probably be working just half days, and then I would spend the rest of the time down at the beach in the summer on Lake Michigan. But at any rate, yeah, it's a great tool. Grasshopper is a great tool for making skyscrapers. So a skyscraper is basically an array. It's an array of, I'll call them floor slabs. So we're going to go ahead and make that make that array of floor slabs. So I'm double clicking and I'm typing in array, and we're going to choose a linear array. And the direction that we're going to array, by default, it's set to the X direction. You see this array going horizontal to the right in the positive X direction. And I'm going to want that array to be in the Z direction. Okay, so a couple things that Grasshopper wants here. It wants the distance between the floor slabs and the number of floor slabs. So for the distance between the floor slabs, I'm going to type in 10. So that's going to be 10 feet. Just organize this a little bit better here. Okay, so I can do things like I can rename the number slider. I just right-clicked over the words number slider, and I can type in distance between floors. So a lot of times my students and I will have conversations about how you would use a tool like Grasshopper in an architecture firm where you're working and you're collaborating with other people that are working in the same definition. And I'm always curious how they're doing it when they're working as interns in these firms. How are they structuring their Grasshopper definition? And doing things like that is important. Calling out that number slider is changing the distance between the floors. And we can also do something similar with the number of floors. So I'm going to double click and I'm going to type in, for right now, we'll just make it 50 floors. Okay, so this number slider is now going to be number of floors. And the other thing that I mentioned to my students is that you guys are essentially going to be dictating how Grasshopper is used in an office. So starting good practices now is very important. So you see we have an array of floors. We have 50 floors, and there's 10 feet between each floor. So we're starting to create this tower. And remember, the absolute towers, it's a twisting tower. So that's what we're looking at doing, is making a twisted tower. So I'll start to label some things here. So I'm going to use a scribble, and these are going to be my 2D array of curves. Okay, so that's going to be my 2D. Looks like I got an extra R in here. So that'll be my 2D array of curves. Okay, and from here we can start to do a lot of things. So what we're going to do in this example is we're going to make the floor slabs, which we're pretty close to doing. We're going to make a glass skin, and we're going to make the mullions, which are the dividers between the windows. And we'll start to structure our definition around that. So that's our 2D array of curves. Now I'm going to use another scribble, and these are going to be my floor slabs. Okay, so I'm going to use an extrude. So in some of my previous videos, I've been talking about the most used Grasshopper capsules or most used Grasshopper commands, and one of the users requested that I do that. And I might one day make a video that just talks about those, but that's kind of challenging because you don't really see how certain capsules are used unless you're actually demonstrating it, let's say by using a case study. Case studies are one of the great ways to learn Grasshopper. So we're looking at the absolute towers, and we need to create floor slabs from 2D curves. So extruding is a very common, heavily used capsule, just like an array is used quite a bit in architecture. So we have to give this a direction for the extrusion, which is going to be the Z direction, and a height. I'm going to say that I'm working in feet right now, so maybe 0.75 feet. Okay, and what you're going to notice is when I zoom in on that, they're not capped. Those floor slabs are not capped. When you make an extrusion, that's the default. So I'm going to use a cap holes. Okay, and to get a better look at that in the Rhino window, I'm going to use a custom preview. And to assign the color to that custom preview, I can use two things. I can use a color picker, and I could also use a color swatch. Okay, I've used the color swatch in some previous videos, so I want to use the color picker in this one. So you can see that I can change the color. I can do that by RGB space, so you see red, green, blue, and then there's a saturation level to it. And I can also do that by HSV space, which is hue, saturation, and value. So whichever one you feel comfortable working with. Okay, so these are my floor slabs, and I'm going to move these capsules off to the side. And I'm going to contain all of this into a group by using the shortcut Control G. I get a bounding box of color. Yours might not be red. I've set that to the default. If I right click on that and go down to color, I'm going to change that. You see I'm working with hue, saturation, value. I'm going to change that just to match the color of those floor slabs. Now you see I have these extruded floor slabs. And to send that geometry from Grasshopper to Rhino, I need to bake it. Okay, now the capsule that I need to bake is actually, it's this B-rep capsule. But what I'm going to do is I can use one of these containers. So these containers with the icon, with the hexagon icon, those are containers, meaning they can contain geometry. So I'm just going to use a geometry container, and I'm going to go ahead and plug those floor slabs in. And that's what I'm going to be baking into Rhino. So talking about working in a firm, what I can do is I can add a scribble, and I can change that to the words bake me. Okay, for my floor slabs, that's the only capsule I need. That's what I'm going to bake into Rhino. We won't do that just yet. We'll do it a little later. Now, what you're going to see is the color of this custom preview is not my last capsule. So I'm going to plug that in there. And I'll add this to the group by selecting it. Right click on the color bounding box and choose add to group. So we'll move some of this around. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the capsule that contains my floor slabs, and I can even put the text above that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to select the inverse using Shift Control I is an inverse selection, and then I'm right clicking in the Grasshopper canvas and turning the preview off. So I'm turning the preview off for all the capsules except the floor slabs. And in this case, I'm going to actually, so we can see things a little bit better, I'm going to turn on the custom preview and actually turn off the floor slabs. This is just so we can see that a little bit better. And I'm going to make that a little bit darker. Okay, so we're looking at just our floor slabs. Okay, so I mentioned we're going to make the floor slabs, we're going to make the mullions and the glass skin. So, and that's all going to be based off of this 2D array of curves. So let's go ahead and make the mullions. I'm going to double click and add a scribble. And I'm going to call this one window mullions. Okay, now the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use a divide curve. And I'm going to be plugging in my 2D array of curves into the divide curves. Okay, you see it places a point every so often on each one of those floors. The count right now is set to 10. I'm going to bring out a number slider, and I'm going to double click and type in 15 so I get a number slider from 0 to 100. And I'm going to keep that count low for right now. That's another thing, is when you're working with a lot of geometry, Grasshopper allows you to keep the geometry count low in this case. And I can always raise that up so you're actually, it's less intense on the computer while you're working. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these points to host my mullion shape. And my mullion shape could be a rectangle, could be a circle, and I'm going to do that with a Polygon Capsule. So I'll go ahead and plug the points in, and what you're going to see is, if I zoom in, you're going to see probably a hexagon on each one of those points. And if I use the half green, half white capsule, which I use a lot, with my Polygon Capsule selected, it will show me only the selected capsule. So I can go from the points to the polygon. Now, I just mentioned reducing the amount of geometry while we're working. So I can actually set the number of sides. I can set that to 3. And I'm just looking at a triangle for right now. And I can set the radius. The radius right now is 3. So just to see things a little bit larger while we're working on this, I'm going to set that radius probably to 8, but I'm going to double click and type in 10 and see what that looks like. Okay, so we see those. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use another very common capsule in Grasshopper, which is Loft. And Loft is going to make the shape between those curves. Now there's something we have to do here with the Loft, and let's take a closer look at that. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the Loft. And what you're seeing is it's creating these horizontal rings. And I'm trying to make vertical window mullions. So what I need to do is I need to flip the data tree matrix. And I have a few data tree videos, and I'll link those at the end if you're not familiar with the data tree. So I'm going to go ahead and flip that matrix. And when I plug that flip matrix in, and I'm going to turn off, I'm going to go ahead and turn off this Loft, the original Loft capsule. So turn that preview off. Okay, so I've plugged the curves in and I'm not seeing this loft anymore. That's because the flip matrix actually needs to go before it's plugged into the loft, and I wanted to show you that because a lot of my students will use flip matrix and they'll actually do it all after the loft and they won't see anything. So let's reverse the way that this is plugged in. Okay, let me turn my Loft capsule preview back on. And now you see we have the vertical loft. Now keep in mind we haven't twisted the tower yet. That's something we're going to do at the end. So we're going to do that using a graph mapper. So stick around and see how we do that. So these are the window mullions. And I'm going to take a couple of these scribbles from above and copy paste these down. Okay, so these are my window mullions. Okay, and actually the way I really like to organize this, I like to leave the capsules that I'm gonna bake, I like to leave those outside of the group. Okay, I showed you how to make a container above. I don't always have to do that. I can just leave my last capsule, which in this case is a loft. I can just leave that out onto the side. I'm going to make a group out of these, out of my window mullions. Let's go ahead and assign a color to those as well. Okay, now I'm going to do something similar where I hide all the other capsules. So at the moment, the only capsules that I want to see are these custom previews. So I'm selecting those and doing Shift Control I, and then right clicking and turning preview off. So we're just looking at some very large mullions and some floor slabs. Okay. So I'm going to add this stuff to the group. Okay. Next we're going to make the glass skin, and we're going to make that in a very similar way as our 2D array of curves. I'm sorry, not our 2D array of curves, but as we made our window mullions. So I'm going to go ahead and add a scribble, and I'm going to type in, double click that, and change that to glass skin. And this one's pretty easy. This should just be, go ahead and test it out up here. This should just be a loft between the 2D array of curves. Okay, so you see that generated that glass skin for us. Let's go ahead and get the bake me. So let's say you're working in a firm, you're working with someone else, they can really see, they can see quite easily that the loft is the capsule to bake because you're saying bake me. This is our glass skin. That one's pretty simple. Let's assign a color to that as well. Make that a little bit brighter here. Okay, so now we have to look at rotating this. Let me just make a group out of this. Okay, so let's look at rotating this tower. Okay, so this is really needs to happen back at our 2D array of curves. This is really our launching off point. So we're going to have to rotate those curves before they get plugged into these other places. And there's just 3 places where they're going. They're going to the floor slabs, the window mullions, and the glass skin. Okay, so let's look at using rotate. Now rotate is another one of these capsules that's used a lot in Grasshopper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to isolate this capsule, and I stress this to my students a lot, is I tend to see people when they're working in Grasshopper, new users, I tend to see them working with all the capsules turned on, meaning the preview turned on. And it's really a challenging way to work in Grasshopper. So you really want to focus just on the capsules that you're looking at. And I can do that. One way I can do that is selecting the 2D array of curves and going up and clicking on the half green, half white cylinder. And I could plug that into my rotate, and I can start to, and as I go back and forth, I can start to see some rotating happening. What I'm going to do is, in this case, is not use the half green, half white cylinder. What I'm going to do is select these 2 capsules, and then I'm going to use my Shift Control I, and I'm going to right click and turn the preview off. Okay, so now I'm only seeing this rotate capsule, but I'm also going to turn the preview on for the original. So I'm just looking at these 2 capsules. Everything else is purple, and that's what I've set my hidden capsule fill to. Okay, so I'm just going to focus on the rotation here. Okay, so I'm looking at about a 90-degree rotation between these 2. So if I hover over the angle for rotation, it says 0.5 times pi. Okay, and I notice there that it says rotation angle in radians. Well, I'm not sure about you guys, but I think about rotation in degrees, not radians. I don't know if this is another one of David Rutten's little, he has a sense of humor. I mentioned that before. Or maybe he just likes to work in radians. So what we're going to use is we're going to use a capsule. I'm going to double click, and I'm going to type in degrees. Convert an angle specified in radians to degrees. I want to specify an angle in degrees and convert to radians. Convert an angle specified in degrees to radians. That's what we're going to use. Okay, so to make sure that this is working, we're going to end up using a graph mapper, but let's type in 180 for 180 degrees, and let's see what happens there. Okay, so I just want to make sure that, so 0, there's 90, there's 180. Okay, so this is working the way that I want it. Okay, now where we rotate from is also important. I want to rotate actually from the center point of the floor slab. So where it says plane, rotation plane, right now that is the origin of Rhino, the 0, 0, 0 of X, Y, and Z. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use I need a centroid, so I'm going to use an area capsule. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and plug the geometry in, the original 2D array of curves. I'm going to use those center points. So now you're seeing I'm getting a point at the center of those floor slabs, and I'm going to use that for my plane of rotation. and now it's rotating about the center. Okay, I don't need the original array of curves anymore, so I'm going to shut that off. Okay, so this rotation is not going to get me the absolute twisting tower, so we're going to go ahead and use the graph mapper now. Okay, so let's get rid of that, and I'm going to bring out the graph mapper. Okay, this is one of those capsules that just sets you up for failure because it's just a purple box, but we'll dig into this, and I'll put a link to a video where I talk about the graph mapper in more detail. But basically, a graph mapper, it needs a domain. I'm going to widen this out for us. It needs a domain, and a domain is a minimum and maximum. So for my minimum and maximum values, I'm using construct domain. My minimum and maximum values are going to be, I'm going to use 0, and I'm going to use 360. So these are degrees of rotation. So between 0 and 360 degrees. Now, to create those values, I'm going to need a range. And this is also covered in the same video that I'm going to link at the end, which is building a strong foundation in Grasshopper. And to build a strong foundation, you have to be able to understand what a range is, what a domain is, what a series is. So building a strong foundation in Grasshopper is a video that I'm going to link up. So the range is looking for a domain. It's looking for the number of values, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So let me just get more organized here. Okay, I'm going to move some of this down. So what we're doing here is we're going to use, I'm going to make a scribble. Okay, we're using graph mapper to rotate the tower. Okay, so let's keep doing that. And we're going to have to talk a little bit more about graph mapper. So I'm going to zoom in the graph mapper, and I'm going to right click, and what I need to do is I need to set the graph type, and we're going to set that to a Gaussian type. So it's going to be increasing and decreasing values. So here the values will be increasing, they'll get to a certain point, and then those values will start to decrease. And what's important about the graph mapper is the domain, these domains of the graph mapper must equal the domain that we've constructed over to the left here. That's really important. So I'm just going to make a little note for the person that I'm working with. Okay, I mentioned if we're working in a firm, and it's interesting because in the video that I explained graph mapper, I was changing the domain on the left, but I wasn't changing the domain of the graph mapper, and I wasn't getting the desired result. I actually didn't figure it out until after the video. So it happens to me. It'll typically happen to most people working in Grasshopper and working with the graph mapper. So I'm just putting must match construct domain, because that's what we plugged in. So must match construct domain. And we're going to take a closer look at that now and make this text a lot smaller. Okay, so our construct domain is between 0 and 360. So the way that I set this between 0 and 360 is I double click on it, and I'm changing the domain in both the X and the Y. So my X maximum, domain is minimum maximum. Minimum X 0, maximum X 360. Minimum Y 0, maximum Y 360. Okay. Now what isn't set yet, you see some rotation happening at the very base of the tower. I don't have enough values. I have to have the exact values as number of floors. So if I put a little note here, and I'm gonna add, I'm gonna take this scribble and copy and paste it. So this much must match number of floors, and it's actually -1. And that's something else in the video that I'm going to link up at the end of this video that I talk about when using, not when using Graph Mapper, but when using a range of values. It always adds 1. So I'm guessing there's 11 values. I'm going to use my, I'm hopeful that that's true. That should be, theoretically. I'm going to use my best friend, the panel, just to see. This should be 0 through 10, which is going to be 11 values here. And there's only 10 plugged in. Okay, so that's why I need this -1. So I'm going to right click on the steps, go to expression, and I'm going to make this x -1. And on this panel, you're going to see 0 through 9, which is 10 values. So there's our 0 through 9. So this must match number of floors -1. When we have the -1 expression, now we need our number of floors, and that we have a number slider for, not floor. We have 50, and I can plug that in. Okay, so now we're getting our rotation values. We have this very steep graph at the moment. So we can look at adjusting this. So if I want it to be more gentle, now we're getting a nice gentle curve that's more like the absolute towers that I'm showing in the image. And we can see this better when we loft this as the glass skin. Okay, so this is creating our rotation. This capsule now becomes the new 2D array of curves. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that down here. And this is now the capsule that needs to go everywhere that this one above went to. So basically I'm going to trace it and replace it. I'm not going to use the shift key. So I just want to do that first with the glass skin, so we can see this a little nicer. Okay, now I need to turn on that capsule for the glass skin. Okay, so now we're seeing that. And I can go back to the graph mapper here and take a look at that rotation is following my graph type. We can do the further, like lower twist on the tower and higher twist on the tower. Okay, so I think you get the point there. So let's continue to trace this one. So I'll be replacing it. So this is going to have to go into my floor slabs. Oh, I used the shift key there. Needs to replace it. No shift key. And I'll turn those floor slabs on. Now I'm seeing those, and then into my window mullions. And I'll turn those on. And you see everything is following the twisting. Let's add some more window mullions. So we're going to increase the count on the window mullions. So that's here, and so I can, again, you can't do enough labeling, so this is number of mullions. So I can go ahead and increase that. And let's make the size of the mullion a little bit smaller. Okay, so that will get you pretty far along in making the absolute towers. Let's go ahead and group this together. So not a bad definition, pretty well organized here. Someone could easily take over this definition, and they would go in and bake wherever the capsule is that says bake me. In this case, you would only be baking 3 capsules into Rhino. And what you would want to do is you would want to make corresponding layers to those to bake to. So you'd make a layer called floor slabs, a layer called window mullions, and a layer called the glass skin in Rhino, and you would bake to those. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video, and go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and go ahead and follow me on Instagram to see what I'm up to. I visit a lot of architecture and schools starting at IIT, so you'll see me interacting with my students and seeing some of the projects that they're creating. So I'll see you next time.